Hello, Julie here and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm making an art journal page. I am not making this for anything in particular, I just wanted to make one. I'm going to use a page out of my Happy Planner notebook. I glue or stick two pages together because it is just a normal notebook, and then I give one side of the page a coat of gesso and leave the back blank, and that is where I write what I've used on the page. So because my background is already gessoed, I can get started straight away. I'm going to use some Montmartre modelling paste with this Kaisercraft stencil called Script. And I'm just going to put the modelling paste through the stencil so that it gives me some texture on the background of my page. Now that my background's dry, I like to let it dry naturally. I'm going to use some powders. I'm going to use a couple of colour crush powders. One's called wheatgrass and one's called pineapple, so that's a yellow and a green. And I'm also going to use a colour blast powder, colour mica powder, and this one's called polar and that's a blue. I'm just going to use one of these little spoons to tap that around onto my background. I'm putting fair amount of colour on here. I want it to be quite bright and dark. I don't want a pastel-y sort of a look. I want plenty of strong colour. Now that I've got all of my powders on my page, I take my water spray bottle and I just spray all over the page, activating the powder, bringing the colours to life. I give it plenty of water, and the more water, the more you dissolve the powders and the more chance your colours have got to run and blend together. I add more colour as I feel it needs it, and once I'm happy with how the page looks, I set that aside to dry. I'm going to use alcohol inks to make my focal point, and I'm using some photo paper here. I'm going to just sprinkle the blending solution onto the photo paper, then I'm going to add the alcohol inks. You have to give these a good shake. These are shimmer alcohol inks by Paper Mill, and I'm just tipping them or dotting them all over the cardstock and letting them blend together, and when I want them to move a little more, I will add a bit more blending solution and tip the papers so that they will move around more. The colours I'm using are a shimmer called Lemon Yellow, another shimmer called Magenta, and the orange that I'm using is not a shimmer, it's called Mandarin. Later on you'll see that I will add some white, and I will also add a pearl mixative. The pearl mixative doesn't work all that well and brushes off once the ink's dry, so I'm not sure how that actually is supposed to work, but I need to have a look more at that and work out a better way of doing it. So I go ahead and play around with this, and I create two 6x4 pieces of cardstock to make my focal points. While my alcohol ink is drying, I'm going to do a bit more work on the background. I'm going to use this Kazaz Life's Moment background stamp. It's just got words on it. I'm going to use my Stays On ink, and I'm just going to stamp basically all over the background. Because the words are fairly insignificant, like they're not real thick, they blend in nicely to the background. They don't stand out a great deal, but there's just something there if you're actually looking. I decided to use this 13 Arts Aida ink in white to put some splashes on the background. It doesn't splash. I need to actually dab the white onto the background. Unfortunately, the colour from the background gets absorbed up into the white ink, and when it's dry you can hardly see it at all. I'm going to start work now on making the trunks for my trees. I'm going to use this Kaisercraft clear stamp called Wood Grain, and I'm going to use those for archival inks. I'm going to use jet black, watering can, fern green and russet. So I'm just going to stamp those colours onto the glossy photo paper, which is the same as the tops of the trees, or the alcohol ink is put onto. And I'm just going to stamp them on top of each other, all of those colours, so that I get a woody looking wood paper. As I said before, that white ink that I put on the background, when it was dry you could hardly see it, so I decided to use some white acrylic paint, water that down and splatter that on using my fan brush that you can see there. That also didn't stay completely white. It did absorb some of the colour as well, so I didn't end up with white splatters on the background. I ended up with some pale splatters. I used a pencil and drew some tree shapes on the backs of the pieces of alcohol ink card that I'd made, and I'm going to use my scissors and cut them out. I've done a couple of sort of like pointy oval shapes and one circular shape. These will be my tree tops. So now I'll play around with the placement of my trees, trying to decide where I'm going to put what tree, and once I'm happy with how I've got them placed, I will attach them using some matte medium. I put matte medium on the back of the tree top, and I use gloss medium on the front because I don't want to lose that pearlescent sheen from the alcohol inks. I also bring in my stamped gloss paper that I made for the stems, and I cut my stems to suit my trees. I put a sort of like forked or jagged end on the top where they're going to actually attach to the tree, and I curved them a little in the actual body of the trunk. It's really quite tricky sticking these down because the powders on the background are reactivated when they get wet, and so I find that you have to be really careful, and I'm constantly cleaning up around the background and around the edges of the trees and stems. Once again I set that aside to dry. You can't really do anything with the wet glue on a page, so I've set it aside to dry, and I've come back a few hours later, and now I'm using my food ball pen to outline each and every one of the trees, their stems, just to bring them to life a little, lift them up off the page and give them a bit of definition. I use a sketchy line and I go around the edge of the coloured paper, and then I outline on the background as well, so you get sort of a fairly thick solid line, but a sketchy line just the same. I had a bit of a video malfunction here, or brain freeze, one or the other. I thought the video was turned on and it wasn't, and I started doing these white strips across the round tree and realised that it wasn't videoing, so I started the video halfway through. So I'm just doing a bit of decorating on each of the trees. The round tree I'm just putting a thin white diagonal line through, The smaller of the tall trees, I'm putting quite a thick white line through, and the tall one I'm going to just add some black circles. I'm using my fine line bottles to do this. In one of them, this one, I keep my white acrylic paint that I've watered down slightly. In point of actual fact, I haven't watered it down enough because it's too hard to push and get the paint to come out, so I need to adjust that. And the other one, of course, is black acrylic paint, and I'll use that shortly to make the circles on the taller tree. I find these very handy, and I have actually bought another couple. I'm going to put gold in one, and I had planned on putting glue in one, but the glue that I'm using is too thick and it jams up the nozzle, so I'll have to find some thinner glue for that. But anyway, yeah, so that's what I'm doing here. I'm decorating the trees. I use my black acrylic paint to put a border around the page. It's just a fine black line. I don't think it needs a great deal more. I'm going for a fairly light and breezy sort of feel to this page. For my quote, I hunted around on the internet and found a quote. Well, I've only used part of it, and the quote was different, but I've just taken the piece out that I want. It says, "Trees are the miracle of life." So I've printed that on my computer using some cardstock and a couple of different style fonts and sizes. And I'm just going to use my Aleene's original tacky glue to attach these to my background, because as I said before, I have to be pretty careful about smudging the background when I'm using any sort of wet medium on there. So I attach those, and then I use my food ball to go around the edge of them and put a black border around each piece of cardstock. You will notice in the close-up that in that smaller tall tree, I have gone back in there with a fine black pen and put a line underneath and above each of those white lines. That completes my page for today. I hope you've enjoyed watching my video. If you haven't already subscribed, I would love it if you did, and I look forward to seeing you next time I post a video. Thank you.